Section 3.1, Cell Theory. So, what is a cell? A cell is the basic unit of life. It's the unit that all living things are composed of, be it a one-celled organism or a multicellular organism. They are all composed of cells. The two types of organisms that cells create are either unicellular meaning composed of only one cell, or multicellular, composed of many cells. So one-celled organisms could be like Paramecium or amoeba. These are both protista. Or bacteria would be a one-celled organism, or multicellular organisms like the ostrich or the pine tree, or humans or dogs or anything else of that nature. The tool that is necessary to see cells would be a microscope. Okay, and there's a very early version of the microscope here, and this is a more modern version, what we'd be using in our class version of a microscope. These are both able to magnify the object bigger than you could see with the naked eye, and as a result, it makes cells visible. So the changes that happened as microscopes improved were they became sturdier. Okay, comparing this more early microscope to the modern type that we'd be using over here, you can see these things just don't look like super sturdy. They're a little bit fragile. This guy is also much more difficult to use, so as microscopes improved, they got easier to use. Things like holding stage clips, which will hold your slide in place, and we have focus adjustments, the coarse adjustment here and the fine adjustment here, as well as multiple objective lenses that could change the magnification and actually get a much greater magnification than what the earlier microscopes were able to use. The ones that we're using in our class under low power can magnify about 40 times what you'd see with the naked eye, and under high power about 430 times what you'd see under the naked eye. So much improved over the early scopes. Single-celled organisms contain all the necessary parts to A, function, meaning carry out all the processes necessary for life. Of course, they're able to live on their own. They don't need other cells to help do things for them. They can do everything on their own. And they have the ability to reproduce. So this is something that must be necessary for single-celled organisms to do. Function, live, and reproduce. And they have all the necessary parts within their cell membrane to do that. So a multicellular organism is different from a unicellular one in that multicellular organisms have many cells to perform specific functions necessary to keep the entire organism alive. There'll be cells that are responsible for producing food, for doing work, whatever that work would be, either movement or breaking down food or getting rid of waste. They'd be able to reproduce. And multicellular organisms are composed of individual cells that have specialized functions. So think about in a human, we have all these different cells that have carry out specific functions. We have muscle cells that were to help with movement, nerve cells that innervate or give stimulus to those muscles to get them to move and help us with movement. You have cells responsible for reproduction. You have cells responsible for producing hormones that will carry out changes in your body or respond to stimulus from your environment. But all these different cells work together to keep the multicellular organism functioning. So the three parts of the cell theory are, first, all organisms are made of cells, at least one or more cells. Okay, number two, all existing cells are produced by other living cells. There's no such thing as spontaneous generation where life just arises from nothing. Okay, and three, the cell is the basic unit of structure and function in living things. The two basic categories of cells would be, first, prokaryotes, These are more primitive cells, less complex cells. And eukaryotic cells, which make up all the multicellular organisms. There are some one-celled organisms that are eukaryotic cells, but the majority of them would be multicellular. Where prokaryotic cells would be bacteria. These things are all one-celled critters, meaning they have to do everything on their own, where eukaryotic cells can be unicellular or multicellular. So what are examples of eukaryotic cells, and what types of organisms are composed of eukaryotic cells? Well, examples would be algae. So algae would be like, you usually call it seaweed, but it's actually like kelp and other things that are in water. Plant-like, they're not true plants, but plant-like organisms in water. All the animals will be composed of eukaryotic cells. So from dogs and cats to fish or sharks or zebras or anything like that, they would all be composed of eukaryotic cells. Fungi, which would be mushrooms, but also things like mold, and plants. So all the different plants, like the plant crops that we eat, corn, potatoes, etc., or plants like flowers, trees, etc. Those would all be composed of eukaryotic cells. Okay, so a prokaryotic cell is a single-celled bacteria. This would be an example of it. Now, the main characteristics of prokaryotic cells is they have no membrane-bound organelles. No membrane-bound organelles or specific structures within them that carry out specialized functions. They still have DNA, they still have a cell membrane, they still have cytoplasm, they still have ribosomes, but they don't have membrane-bound organelles. So I always put this little mnemonic here. So prokaryote equals no membrane-bound organelles or no nucleus. Pro, no membrane-bound organelles. Pro, no nucleus. So as you can see from our diagram, the cell that is smaller would be a prokaryotic cell. Okay, it's much smaller. Okay, much less complex. It doesn't have the structures within it. It doesn't have the complexity within it, or a eukaryotic cell has these specialized structures like this, chloroplast and mitochondria that carry out specific functions for it, a vacuole, nucleus. All these things would be characteristic of a eukaryotic cell, where a prokaryotic cell has none of that. Okay, and they are much smaller. The types of cells that have a cell wall would be plant cells. Okay, plant cells have a cell wall. Animal cells do not. Prokaryotes also have a cell wall. Okay, so a cell wall would be, this is a typical plant cell. This is the cell wall here. It's the outermost part of the cell. It would be relatively firm structure in a plant made of cellulose. And in a bacteria or a prokaryotic cell, the cell wall again would be on the outside of the cell, and again it's going to provide protection and support for the prokaryotic cell. Okay, the structures that are found in all types of cells, and there are 4 of them. The first one is cytoplasm. Cytoplasm is like the liquidy, kind of gelatinous inside part of the cell that all the other things are floating around in. All cells have DNA, which is a reproductive material, carries a genetic code, and that is passed on from the parent cell to the offspring. The cell membrane, remember the cell membrane is made up of phospholipid molecules, and it makes up the outermost part of the living cell. Okay, and the last thing would be ribosomes. Ribosomes are where proteins are made in all cells. Okay, so these 4 structures are present in all cells. Plant, animal, bacteria, all of them have those. Okay, so some differences between prokaryotes and eukaryotes. I'm going to make this very simple for you. You're going to remember this rhyme. Okay, pro equals no. U equals true. So prokaryotes have no nucleus. and no membrane-bound organelles. Eukaryotes have a true nucleus and true membrane-bound organelles. Because prokaryotes have no nucleus, the DNA is just floating in the cytoplasm. It's just inside the cell membrane, but it's not in the nucleus because prokaryotes don't have one. Eukaryotes, the DNA is in the nucleus. Prokaryotes are single-celled organisms. Okay, eukaryotes can be either multicellular or single-celled organisms. Bacteria would be prokaryotes. Plants, animals, fungi, protista would all be eukaryotes. The similarities between prokaryotes and eukaryotes is they're both microscopic. They have similar building blocks, meaning the molecules that make them up. In all cells, both prokaryote and eukaryote, have these four things that are necessary. They have a cell membrane, they have cytoplasm, they have ribosomes, and DNA. So these would be the similarities between prokaryotes and eukaryotes. So suppose a certain poison kills human cells by blocking the pores in the nucleus. Would this poison kill bacteria? Why or why not? Well, think about it. A human cell is a eukaryotic cell, so it has a nucleus. Bacteria is a prokaryote, so it doesn't have a nucleus. So if the poison works by working on the nucleus, which the bacteria does not have, would it kill the bacteria? And the answer would be no. Okay, if it's killing the bacteria by blocking the pores in the nucleus, which it doesn't have, then it wouldn't kill it because it doesn't have a nucleus, making the poison ineffective. How was the development of cell theory related to advancements in technology? Remember, the three components of cell theory are all living things are composed of one or more cells. The cell is a basic unit of structure and function in living things, and all cells come from the reproduction of previously existing cells. Well, until a scientist could actually see cells under the microscope and see how they behave and see how they divide and see what different living things were composed of, they really had no idea what cell theory was. But as technology improved, so did the scientists' understanding of cells, and they were able to put together cell theory.